You threw it away? The $1,500 watch my father gave me as a birthday gift? My husband, Sean, was gifted a watch by his father-in-law. It never left his wrist. I nodded and said, "That's right. I threw it in the garbage. I would do it again, too." Sean became even angrier at my response. He yelled, "You're an asshole, you know that? Are you insane?" I guess you could see it that way, but my name is Michaela, Mickey for short, and I am 29 years old. Sean and I were married a year ago, and unfortunately, we live with my in-laws in their house. My father-in-law never misses an opportunity to put me down. "You're not even good at making tea," he loves to tout. Every day is a living hell. I would pray that I would wake up from this horrible dream. My husband and I went to the same high school, and we re-met at our reunion. He confessed that he had always loved me, and we began dating before getting married a year ago. I was so happy. I loved Sean, and I was so excited about our life together. As long as he was by my side, I would always be taken care of, and I thought that I would be a part of a beautiful family. But now I realize that these thoughts were very, very naive. After we got married, I moved in with my husband and my in-laws. I discovered that my father-in-law was a very troubled man. He was very old-fashioned, a misogynistic man, the type of man who would never dream of making his own tea. And according to Sean, he told Sean's mother that it was wrong for a woman to disobey a man. Once, he threw a plate at her for going against him. I was surprised when I heard this. I couldn't believe it, but it was true. In fact, I started to notice that my father-in-law was quite the xenophobe. He was very critical of me, an immigrant from abroad. I was working as an interpreter, speaking both English and Japanese. Maybe it wasn't because I was a foreigner. Perhaps it was because he didn't think very highly of me in the first place. In any case, he blamed me for everything and spoke ill of me. I love being an interpreter. It's a job where I feel my skills are most useful. Although there were assignments where I had to be on the field, most of my work was done at home for interpreting meetings and things like that. It's a job where I feel my skills are very useful. I was very good at my job, and I did not appreciate that my father-in-law would always insult my work. When he would go on, I would think to myself, "What's wrong with you? Hating someone just for speaking English? Just because they're a foreigner?" I don't prefer foreign countries. I hate English. I don't want to hear a word of English, and yet my son marries an English-speaking immigrant and brings her home to me. I often hear him muttering under his breath, "I can't stand foreigners." When I overhear him, I just want to cover my ears. He thinks that because I'm from a foreign country, I won't be good at tea ceremony or cooking a proper meal. But I've lived in Japan and I love Japanese culture. I've even taken care to learn Japanese manners. I looked at my father-in-law and said, "Even though I'm from another place, I've lived in Japan and I love Japan. Your behavior is embarrassing." Embarrassed? Who is embarrassed? I thought, you should be embarrassed for saying those heartless words to me just because I'm from another country. But even though I was annoyed by my father-in-law's words, I kept my mouth shut. I thought that even though he said such horrible things, he was Sean's father and I should just put up with it. At first I thought, just because he hates me now doesn't mean he won't learn to like me over time, even though he can't even look at me without a scowl on his face or even try to get to know me because of his prejudice. His words were so sarcastic and hurtful to me every day. I'm going to teach you to be Japanese the right way. He gives me jobs to do around the house. There was cleaning, like laundry, but I also had to rub his shoulders. It made me very sad to think that my father-in-law manipulated us to move in with them because he secretly wanted to make me miserable. At least, that's what it seemed like. I knew that I would never be able to understand him. Although my mother-in-law apologizes for him, she knows she can't say anything to him. I feel sorry for her, and I hated him for thinking he could control other people and make them suffer. I hated my father-in-law for being like this. There were times when I wanted to tell Sean the truth about his parents, but he was very busy with work and he was traveling a lot. I couldn't talk to him about it because I didn't want to worry him. Hey, it's time to make lunch. Hurry up. Since I work from home, I was often at home all day. My job doesn't just let me take breaks whenever I want. The meetings I interpret can go on forever, and it's hard to take a break at a certain time. I wanted to have a late lunch alone. That was my favorite. But my father-in-law had other ideas. Hurry up. He didn't care that I hadn't finished work yet. My father-in-law kept calling for me to hurry up. I have to work, so I want to eat lunch on my own time, I tried to explain to my father-in-law one time. This English-speaking job is not good for you. Don't you know it's customary to follow your in-laws' wishes? This is common sense. This is why immigrants are so annoying. They don't know such things, he said coldly. My father-in-law's words were so unreasonable, and it tortured me. He wanted me to cook lunch right then and enjoyed making things difficult for me. The most stressful thing for me was that he made it impossible for me to concentrate on my work. After that, my father-in-law's behavior toward me escalated further. He ordered me to clean the room every morning and made unreasonable rules, such as not getting up from my seat for lunch until everyone had finished eating. They would also come into my room and interrupt me when I was working. I don't want to hear English, I was once yelled at in front of my room. It was hard for me. Why do I have to go to this extreme? I had reached the end of my patience with my father-in-law's words and actions when they interfered with my work. If I didn't do something about it, I would lose my important job. And my heart was in shreds from the daily swipes he would take at my mother-in-law. I can't do this anymore. I was so happy to be married to Sean, whom I love. I thought that if I could stay by Sean's side, I would be fine even if things got bad. But, like I said, I was naive. I can't be with my father-in-law like this anymore. I am not happy at all. Tears welled up in my eyes because it was so painful. That night, I decided to talk to Sean about it, and I began crying. When I told him everything that my father-in-law had done to me, he was absolutely mortified. He apologized to me several times. I'm so sorry I didn't realize. I swore I would make you happy, Mickey. Sean confronted my in-laws about my suffering, and they were angry with me. Then, he made me a proposal. "Mickey, let's move out. We don't have to live with my parents. Let's buy an apartment and live together." "Are you sure?" "Of course. I think it is the best thing for the two of us from now on." I was really happy. I felt like I had seen the light in the darkness. I felt reassured, and I was happy to have married this man. So, Sean and I moved out of the house. After we moved out, I never saw my in-laws again, and since Sean gave my father-in-law a hard time for how he treated me, he didn't do anything to me anymore. Life had returned to normal. I was soaking in the happiness of being able to spend my time freely and concentrate on my work every day. I realized that I had taken for granted the happiest thing in my life. 1 year later, I became pregnant. Sean was happy. He was full of happiness. Mom and Dad seem happy too. Sean seemed to have told my in-laws about my pregnancy. "Well, that's great." Even though I smiled outwardly that my in-laws were happy, my heart sank. It had been a year since that hellish day, and yet I still felt so bad when I remembered what my father-in-law had done to me. "Just because we're having a baby doesn't mean you have to see my parents. I don't want to do anything that will make you feel bad. The most important thing is the baby and you, Mickey," Sean told me. And then I safely made it to the day of the birth, and a healthy baby girl was born. I cried as she squeezed my hand with her tiny hands, and she loved me so much. It was as if all of the pain I had been going through was nothing. "You know," Sean asked me with an expression that made it difficult for me to say anything, "can I let my parents see her alone? They were so happy when I told them she was born safe and sound, and I wanted them to see their little girl." Sean then continued, "I'm sorry. I told you you didn't have to see them." I shook my head at Sean's words. "It's totally fine. I understand how you feel. It's natural to want to let your beautiful daughter meet your parents. And even though my father-in-law did such a terrible thing to me, I know that he cared for you. I wanted to fulfill your wish because I know how important they are to you. It's been a year since then. I'm sure your father-in-law has reflected on what's happened, and I wish I could see him too." When I said this, Sean put on a big smile. "Yes, that was a year ago, and people change. Let's think positive," I told myself. On the day I left the hospital, Sean, my daughter, and I were on our way to my in-laws' house. I had not seen my father-in-law since then, so I was a little nervous. When we arrived at my in-laws' house, they greeted us with smiles. Seeing my father-in-law looking a little happy as he looked at his little daughter, I felt relieved and at the same time glad that I had brought her with me. Sean also looked happy, and my father-in-law didn't seem to be making any sarcastic comments to me, which was a huge relief. Thank God, I knew my father-in-law was sorry for what he had done. Then, my father-in-law brought out a gift-wrapped box and held it in front of me, saying, "Here is a gift for the birth of your child. It's a $1,500 watch. Please put it on display." $1,500? I was surprised that my father-in-law had prepared such a gift for us, but I was even more surprised by how much it cost. I had never heard of a watch costing $1,500. My mother-in-law, who was standing next to me, was also surprised, her eyes widening. "Don't be surprised. It's my way of thanking you for letting me see my grandchild." Father-in-law! I was very surprised, but I was genuinely happy that my father-in-law had given me a gift. Maybe my father-in-law and I were finally starting to understand each other. My heart was filled with joy at the thought of my father-in-law's approval. After returning home, Sean and I immediately opened the gift celebrating our new baby from my father-in-law. Huh? We were surprised to see the watch. We were so surprised to see the watch because it looked like an ordinary wristwatch. We were a little surprised because we had imagined that a $1,500 watch would look much more flashy. We wondered why this watch cost this much, but since it was a baby gift from my father-in-law, we thought nothing more of it and decided to put it on the shelf in the living room. The phone rang. It's from my father-in-law again. Ever since we received that watch, he has been calling us a lot. For a little while, they were about things like wanting to hear about his grandchildren, but then, just like a year ago, he began to speak disparaging and accusing words about me. Even when I got fed up and ignored his calls, he would call again and again. I thought he might be getting suspicious of me. It was exactly at this time a year ago that I was disappointed that he had not changed, and saddened to think that he did not really like me. My father-in-law is such a relentless caller. Sometimes he would barge into my house if I did not answer the phone, so I had no choice but to pick up. The phone rang several times every day, and when I answered the phone, he would say all kinds of hurtful things. I was exhausted from childcare and work and even my father-in-law, and I was exhausted both physically and mentally. I was in pain, I was in agony, and I even cried. How can I get away from my father-in-law now? I thought I escaped him by moving out of the house, but now that I've left, he still torments me like this. Eventually, my father-in-law started pointing things out to me. Do immigrants only clean once a week? You only had Japanese food for 2 days this week. This is why foreigners are no good. These were the points he made about my behavior. Strangely enough, he was also right. How did he know that? I asked Sean if he was telling him, but he said he didn't know. I was a little scared at the time, but I thought it must be a coincidence. But then he continued to point out my behavior several times, and I felt that it was indeed strange, because everything my father-in-law said was true, and the points he was making were getting more and more specific day by day. I was scared. I felt like I was going crazy. You would have to be there to see this kind of thing. I felt goosebumps all over my body at that moment. Yes, you would have to see it to believe it. I tried to recall what had just happened with my father-in-law. No way, I realized. I was in an uproar when I realized what had happened, and I couldn't stop my body from shaking with fear. I couldn't stop shaking with fear because it was something I couldn't even imagine. Then I looked at my child who was sleeping slowly and thought, I had to protect her. I made a decision to do something, even though I felt my body trembling. Mickey? That night, Sean came home from work with the watch in his hand. He looked angry. You threw it away? The $1,500 watch my father gave me as our daughter's birthday present? Yes, the watch in Sean's hand had been given to us by his father-in-law at the birth of our daughter. I nodded and said, That's right. I threw it in the garbage, and I would do it again, too. Sean became even angrier at my response. You're an asshole, you know that? Are you insane? I guess you could see it that way, but I'm not the problem here. Let me show you. Why don't you push this button? I pointed to the black dot on the clock in Sean's hand. The clock that my father-in-law had given me had a little black button on it. Sean angrily did as I said. His complexion changed. What is this? Was the button a reset button? I wondered. We had never looked at it closely before. It's not a button? No, it's not a button. Take a closer look. Sean observed the small black spot just as I had said, and the look on his face became more and more blue. Camera. Sean was absolutely lost in thought. Yes, there was a hidden camera attached to the watch. He had to look closely to see it, so he hadn't noticed it until now. He had been watching us with that camera for a long time. Oh, no! The reason my father-in-law knew my every move in detail and even knew exactly what was on the menu for dinner was because he had been watching me the whole time. I was horrified with him for doing this. I had a professional take a look. I even had it debugged. It was all your father-in-law's work. For a while, Sean froze in shock at my words, but soon his eyes became determined to do something. Mickey, I'm really, really sorry. I'm sorry I put you through this again. I'll never forgive you, Dad. The next day, Sean and I left our daughter with my parents and headed for my in-laws' house. As soon as we arrived, Sean went to my father-in-law, put the clock in front of him and said, Dad, why do you think we're here? You do know why, don't you? Sean's eyes were filled with anger. My father-in-law's face scrunched up a little at the sight of Sean's temper. What are you talking about? He said in a blank voice. What are you talking about? You're crazy to give her a wristwatch with a hidden camera and a wiretap on it. But my father-in-law insisted. I don't know. Oh, yeah? So that's why it cost $1,500, but I had no idea. My father-in-law would never admit it. I could feel my anger rising at my father-in-law's refusal to admit it. Do you have any proof? Any evidence that I did it? My father-in-law grins at me. I'm sorry you have no proof, but I'm going to have to ask you to pay the price for my breaking heart. You're the one who's going to pay that fee. My mother-in-law, who had never said anything to me before, interjected. Because I am divorcing you. What? What are you talking about? He was a little upset, but he didn't seem to take it seriously. That's just as well, because until now, my mother-in-law had never disobeyed my father-in-law in any way. I told my mother in advance what my father had done, Sean said. After Sean told me, I had a look at your room. What? My father-in-law, who had looked relaxed a moment ago, was becoming impatient. I wanted to think it was a lie, too. Eavesdropping and photographing is a crime, you know. But in your room, there were videos of Sean and his family and his house and so on. I can't believe you really did this. My father-in-law was seeing red. Sean questioned him further. I asked my mother to find receipts for that watch. Here. Sean put the receipts and order forms for the watches in front of his father-in-law. This watch is custom made. You ordered a hidden camera and a wiretap, didn't you? I have solid proof right here. Then, knowing he could no longer get away with it, he confessed everything. I lost the chance to tell Mickey how disgusted I was with her, so I thought I'd watch her behavior on camera, my father-in-law said. Everyone in the room who heard these words felt a surge of indescribable anger and exclaimed in exasperation. After that, my mother-in-law divorced my father-in-law. My father-in-law had to pay alimony to my mother-in-law. Moreover, the house belonged to my mother-in-law's parents, who had given it to her as a gift. So, as a result, my father-in-law was also evicted from the house and now lives alone in a small apartment. My mother-in-law has apparently been enduring unreasonable orders from my father-in-law up until now. She says this was all for Sean's sake. But before she knew it, she was tied down by her husband and she could not escape. But when she saw me being tormented by him too, she became angry at herself for not having the courage to protect me. And finally, she woke up and said he had to get away from this person. Now that she is free from her husband, my mother-in-law lives at her own pace and very leisurely. Sean also cut ties with his father-in-law, and there was no one left. I live very happily with my husband, Sean, and our daughter. Sean, who used to work a lot of business trips and overtime, changed his job to spend more time with his family, and I can spend more time with him than ever before. And since the incident with my father-in-law, we have been able to talk to each other about any problems, big or small. And I think our relationship as a couple has grown even deeper. I am happier now than I ever have been. Happiness comes in different forms for different people, but I want to cherish my own happiness. It is wrong to sacrifice oneself for the sake of someone else's happiness.